Hello, in this video, we're going to go over how to create components using React to help design our web page. So one of the main benefits of the React framework is that it lets us code and sort of structure our page in terms of what are called components. So you can think of a component as sort of a user interface, a UI component. It's a part of the web page. So rather than having to think about sort of our page purely in terms of HTML elements, right? Here's a heading, a header, here's an H1, here's a paragraph, here's a div. We can think about it in terms of parts of the page, sort of semantic components. So as this example that I borrowed off the internet from a long time ago, we could think of a page rather than being a whole bunch of divs with a whole bunch of images and divs and divs and more divs inside of it. We can think of this as being is that here's this whole page is a single app, right? That's sort of in the black boxed area. And the app, of course, has a home page part and an employee page part. The employee page, each of these pages has a header, which is the same type of component, even if the content's a little bit the same, right? We've got a search bar part of my page. I have a list of employees. Each employee list is then made up of a bunch of employee list items, each of which are the same style, the same kind of thing, even if the content is a little bit different. What this lets us do is this lets us think about the design and structure of our page, not in terms of this is a div that has more divs that has more divs inside of it and have to try to think through that and try to at this like kind of like weird diving level, but we can think about it in terms of components, right? The header, the search bar should go below the header, or the search bar should go above the header. We can make those decisions easily without having to sort of think about the details about where the HTML is going. So React lets us design pages and structure and actually write our code in terms of these UI components. The way that React lets us do that is by creating our own HTML elements. We're able to create our own XML elements, effectively making our own HTML. So I can define an app element, and a child of the app element will be a homepage element, and that homepage element contains a header, a search bar, and an employee list, and that employee list contains a bunch of different employee list items, each one of which is for a different person. And this is literally the code that we will write, right? We don't have to write this in terms of divs and list items and images. We use that to define what each of these things looks like, right? What is an employee list item? But we can structure and design our page in terms of these more broader semantic components. This both makes it easy to sort of think about and partition the page in your brain, right? I can think about what's the header look like without having to worry about everything else around it. And it lets us be able to then really sort of organize and structure the way that we design pages, which matters particularly as we get to larger and larger, more complex applications. So React lets us define our own XML components, which are going to be these HTML elements, which are these components, which let's put these together. Okay, the way that we code that in React is we define a component as a function. This is a normal, everyday function, exactly like every other function we've ever written in JavaScript or really in any language at all. So if we want to create a new component, like we had our home page or a header or a search bar, we define a function that represents what that component will be. You can almost think of it like a class. It's going to be sort of the template that says, here's what an instance of that will look like. All right, so let's do an example. I'm starting off with some HTML content that I've gone ahead and created and built inside of React. So we have a content element, which is basically going to be a header with a div and some and paragraphs inside of it. This is pulling out of sort of a demo that I did, where sort of we did some practice with Bootstrap, sort of creating a kind of fake homepage for this Info 340 course with a bunch of different like cards explaining what topics we learned. Okay, so we've got ourselves some content. If we want to create a component to represent this, I can define myself a new function. So my function, I'm going to write a new function, and I'm going to call my function based on whatever that component's going to be. So in this case, this might be the header component, right? And it's just a function. We name functions using uppercase letters. We capitalize them and capitalize camel case the same way that you would name a class in Java or in Python, right? We need to make sure it's important. You have to do this because it distinguishes between component elements and DOM HTML elements, right? It's how we distinguish between the capital H header and a lowercase h header. So this is my header component. This function, these component functions are always going to take a single argument, one argument, which is called props with an S. We'll talk about what the props are in another video, but for now, every component we write is going to include that argument, and that is the only argument that we give to these functions. Okay, this function is then going to do, it's a normal function, we can do whatever we want. It is going to then return whatever DOM makes up that component. So whatever DOM we want this thing to look like. So effectively the return says, what should the header look like? And we're going to return what it should look like. And in this case, I want my header to have the same content, right? I want to include this stuff. So I'm going to move that stuff into my header and say that is the thing that I want to represent. So I'm defining my component, a header component. I'm returning what it's going to look like. So I'm returning this HTML content. Once we do that, right, that's the content I want to show, we can then instantiate this component. We can make an instance of it, right? We can actually make a header component to put on the screen by writing it out as our own HTML element, where the name of the element is the name of our component. So because I called this thing header component, I can make myself a new header component element. And again, these two things match. If I just called this header, then I would instantiate myself a new header. But I'm calling them header component because I'm trying to keep them distinct. So we create this as if we were writing our own HTML, right? I'm just making my header component. And then, of course, I render that content the same way I was rendering content before. And what you'll then see is that nothing has changed, right? I've now rendered that component in my content. Right? My content now contains a header component. And that's the basic idea of what a component looks like. Great. I can go ahead and create more components. So I can go ahead and have a function that could be a topic card, for example. And again, we're going to take this props component. My topic card can look like one of these cards from, these list of topics here. So I'm going to just grab and copy and paste the content from one of these things, right? It's a div. And I will copy and paste it into here and say that that's what I should look like. I'm going to look like this div, this set of content. Okay, things to note when I'm when I copy and paste, you need to be a little bit careful about copying and pasting from raw HTML. So one thing you'll notice that we can see that my image is underlined here. That's because you need to make sure that it has a closing tag. In React, in JSX, all elements need to be closed. Similarly, your components need to be closed. We generally make them self-closing in this way. So I need to do that, and now that lets my content return. Then in my content here, right, I can have my content have a div, and inside that div, I can put my header component followed by my topic card, right? Those are the two components I want to have. So now I'm organizing it. So I've got a header followed by a topic card. If we look at our page, then we then get my header component followed by my topic card. I'm going to fix my link real fast. So this was to public image. Oh, these are the wrong sets of images. Okay, let me fix that real fast. No, it's not. Yes, it is. These are it's from a slightly older demo. Sorry about that. I'm going to take my old file images and I'm going to put them into my public folder. Replace that. There we go. There we go. Now it works. Cool. Great. So that now shows my card, my HTML card, sort of right there where I expect it to be. I can, of course, include lots of topic cards, right? I can just make more than one. Now I have 2 topic cards in a row. And of course, you see now what this lets me do is it's letting me be able to specify multiple elements, right? I can have lots of topic cards in a row without having to copy and paste that div content over and over and over again. Or I can actually just say, make me another one. Okay. Other thing to note when I copy and paste that HTML is we got a warning here in our developer console. And again, we're opening the developer console so we can see what it looks like, where it says that I have an invalid DOM property class. Did I mean class name? As I mentioned previously, in JSX, you can't use class as an attribute name, as a property name. You have to use class name. That's because class is a reserved keyword. So if you get that warning, that's an easy warning to fix, right? It tells you exactly what line of code that's happening, right? It's at line, well, it doesn't tell you exactly what line of code it is. It's telling you that's happening at the inside of the div of my topic card. So you can go find it, right? And I can replace that with class name. which fixes the warning. Importantly, if you get a warning like that, stop what you're doing and fix it. Don't be like, oh, I'm going to try to deal with it later. I'll just go ahead and keep writing code. If you get warnings, stop and fix the warnings. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll notice you'll get lots and lots of warnings, and then the actual errors that also show up in red get missed because you don't see them because there's so many other warnings. You stop training yourself to ignore the giant red, and that's a problem. So as soon as you see a warning, and as soon as you see an error, stop whatever you're doing. I don't care if you're in the middle of something, and fix it. Once you then fix it, so you know that's not causing any problems, then you can go ahead and kind of finish the work that you were previously working on. Great. So that's creating our content cards. Now, importantly, these functions are just normal functions, which means that you can include variables and if statements and for loops, and you can do kind of whatever you really want, right? I could go ahead and, for example, let's make a variable, and we could say what the class name of this should be. Here's a class string, and we can say have this class string be this set of cards, be all this stuff, right? Make that a variable. And then, of course, I can just use an inline expression to include that variable as my class name, my class string. Right? Then we can do that kind of work. So again, that doesn't change anything. This is just a function. There's nothing special about components. The only things that make them sort of special functions are that they are named in this particular way and they have this props argument. But you can include variables, if statements, for loops, method calls, anything you want inside that function. Don't think that it has to only return. It can do lots and lots and lots of other stuff. And they will do lots and lots and lots of other stuff. Great. So that builds up our components. Things that you might notice, I've mixed and matched components and HTML content all at the same time, right? Notice I have a div and then I have a header component. I can sort of integrate these things together. So in my my original structure here, right, I had put this inside of a row because I was, again, doing this as a bootstrap grid. So I can do that exact work. I can copy and paste that div in here, that row, and I can make sure that my topic cards show up inside of a row. They all show up next to each other, right? When I do that, I think they're a bit too big, right? They show up next to each other. I should structure them a little bit. I can do that, right? Now, I can make it so that, for example, I want them to be 6 and 6 on maybe small devices. And because I've defined this topic as a template, effectively, right? I've made this as a component. I can make that change in one spot of my code, and it applies to every topic card on the page. I don't have to go down and do that change 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 times. I can do it once in the sort of the template, the component structure template, and it applies to every component I can create. Again, noting there's my invalid class name. I immediately want to stop and fix it. Let's go ahead and make you a row, and that'll show my content up at the same time. Phenomenal. Cool. And that defines our components. Okay, so again, we can mix and match these all together. Importantly, and this is super, super, super important, we always render components as HTML elements inside of the angle brackets. Do never try to call this function like a function. Never try to call topic card or header component with parentheses after it. So do not do topic card parentheses. I know that's challenging. I know that when you see functions, the thing you've trained all your life to do is to call a function by putting the name of the function with parentheses after it. You have to break that habit for React. With React, we don't call these functions. I know we write them as functions. We don't call them like functions. We never call them like functions. If you do, it'll kind of sometimes half work, but it doesn't support most of the functionality, most of the actual behavior we need. Never call them as functions with brackets. Always render them as a component by putting angle brackets, right? That's how you, in air quotes, call the function, right? You render it in angle brackets. Really important. Do not do that. Okay. Great. So we have these components together. Of course, we can start mixing and matching these things and actually build this content out of other components. So for example, at the moment, I can, if I want to say have my topic card sort of box, my topic grid, I can actually go ahead and make a component for that. So I could have my topic grid component, and I am making another component by defining another function. And my topic grid can include this stuff, right? My topic grid can be, we're returning this. What does a topic grid look like? Well, my topic grid can look like the grid, right? The class name of row with my topic cards inside of it. So my grid can include card components, and then my page itself, right? My overall content can just be it could be the header component followed by the topic grid, which we again structure it. So what this is letting me do is it's letting me now define my content kind of at a very high level. How is my page structured? Well, my page is structured as a header followed by a grid. Great, that's what it is. And then someone might say, hey, that's kind of cool. What's a grid look like? And you say, what's a grid look like? I go up to the grid. Well, a grid looks like a row div with some topic cards in it. Awesome, cool, that's what I need. Maybe you don't say, well, what's a topic card look like? And then you jump down to the topic card. Well, a topic card looks like a div that contains an image and an H3 along with it. So what this structure is doing is it's letting you sort of have levels of zoom that you can think about at the different element at the page. You can think about the design in a very high level, right? Just in terms of sort of overall parts, header, grid. You can then think about the grid by itself, right? A grid is just structured of topic cards. How do I want to make those get laid out? How do I want those to get organized? Then you can think about, well, what's an individual card look like? So that way you can sort of think about one part of the page and one component in terms of how you're designing and coding it without having to worry about all the other stuff around it. That's the real benefit to using components as we go. And of course, we might say, well, this whole thing is my app. So let's do that. We're going to make ourselves another component called app, which is a conventional name. And my app is then going to look like this. It's going to look like my div with my header and my topic grid inside of it. So now instead of rendering the content, I'm going to render the app. And that's my structure. So again, I'm showing on my page an app. My app is made up of a div with a header and a topic grid. My header, what's my header look like, is defined as a component. What's my topic grid? That's defined as a component. What's my topic grid is made up of topic cards. What do those look like? That's defined as a component. So I've organized my code, my HTML, into these different functions, each of which is a small piece of my web page. Awesome. Now that we started building this all together, you'll notice that I'm scrolling up and down a lot, which is making it actually a little bit hard to follow. What we tend to do as we build out more and more of these components is we don't want to list them all inside my index.js because that creates a bunch of scrolling behavior that can get really tricky. So what we tend to do is build them and break them up into different modules. So what we're going to do is we're going to put each component into its own module, into its own file, and then inside that file, and then we can import that component from that file in order to be able to use it and render it somewhere else. So, for example, in my content here, right, I'm going to go ahead and create a place, a folder for all of these component modules to live. So inside my source folder, I'm going to create a new subfolder, and I'm doing this through Visual Studio by just right-clicking because I find that the easiest way to make new files and folders. So I'm going to make a new folder here called components. You can call it whatever you want, but again, this is sort of a conventional way of organizing our React app structure. And then inside component, I can make a new file that could, for example, be the header file, right? This is going to be a module. The header module will contain my header. So inside my header.js, I can then go ahead and put my header component. I'm going to cut this out and paste it in here, right? So that's all I'm doing. I'm just moving that code from one place to another. I'm then going to make sure to export this function, or I'm going to export my header component. And then from index.js, I will then be able to import the header component from that header file, which of course you'll notice keeps my page working. Everything works exactly the same. So that now when my app needs to render a header component, it says, what does that look like? Well, it got that function, it got that capability from the header module. I'm going to add the .js here because it obviously didn't add it. Note that these imports are relative to the source file, right? You have to be inside of there. In React, all of your source needs to be inside that source folder. You can never reference anything outside of the source folder, right? You can only import stuff from inside of here. I can't import from public. I can't import from old files. It all has to be from within the source folder because everything is getting transpiled from within that group. Public can't reference source, and source can't reference public. Those two things have to be kept totally separate from one another. Cool. So I can move my header component into that structure. I can move my topics into their own piece, right? I can make a new file here that can be my topics.js. And inside my topics, I can put my topic card and my topic grid. I can actually put multiple components. You'll notice that when I break, like it all breaks as I'm copying, moving stuff around. That's fine. I can put multiple components into a single module. It's not like Java. You don't have to put one class in every file. And we'll generally group these things by that are related to each other. So the topic grid is really just a way of organizing the topic cards. They all kind of come together. So I'm going to put them all into the same place. I'm going to export the topic grid. I don't need to export the topic card because no one ever uses a card by itself. They're only just using the grid, which happens to be made up of these cards. So I can export my topic card, and then inside of here, I can then import my topic grid from, again, the topics.js file. Finally, I can actually go ahead and create my new app.js. And inside the app.js file, I'm going to go ahead and put my app. There's my app.js. Now, importantly, my app.js needs to know about the header and the grid and the topic grid. So these import statements, right, the ones that import header, component, and topic grid, don't go in index.js. They actually go inside of the app. So what happens here, right, is that my topics and my header define those components. The app imports them to define what an app looks like, and then exports the app. App is conventionally exported as a default export, so I'm going to export by default just so that's familiar. And then in index.js, I'm going to import app from app.js. And then I will go ahead and render the app. These need paths. So again, because there are relative paths, I don't need to go into components anymore. So let's fix that. Because again, app is inside the same components folder as header and topic. So therefore, when I'm importing the app, I'm not going to import from components header.js. I'm just going to import from header.js because it's right there. That's where it comes together. Cool. So that's our structure. And that's what we end up with, is that we've defined our app. Our index.js file imports an app from the app.js folder file. The app says, what does my whole application look like? My whole application looks like a header and a topic. My header is defined inside of the header module, and my topics are defined in the topic modules. And this is the structure you're going to get for every React application you build. Your index.js file will generally look only like this. It'll be about 10 lines, maybe 10, maybe 15 lines of code, where all you do is you import app from app.js and you render app. That's the only thing you'll do in the index.js file. Your index.js is we're going to stay very, very, very simple. Your app.js file is going to end up being more complex because that's going to have the sort of the whole entire application, right? That becomes kind of your main file, right? That's kind of your place where most of your work is done. Though that said, your app is then going to be built up a bunch of other components, which are then going to be imported from their own modules. So that lets us, again, structure our application, and we can structure our page in terms of all these different components. It makes it so that I can, when I'm thinking about designing or building this thing, I can focus on one component at a time, right? I can worry about just working on the topic grid and the topic card without having to worry about the header, without having to worry about the app. I can sort of work on one piece at a time in order to be able to then build out and structure my application, right? That's how we're going to build and structure React applications. What you do when you're writing React apps is you're going to basically define all your components. Each component is a part of your page. And then the components define what they all look like. And then you compose and sort of mix and match those components together in order to build out the content for your entire application. And I believe that's it. Great. In the next video, we'll actually then go through sort of how we can start doing some more variants with these kinds of components.